English translation, 496th contact, Saturday, 19th of June 2010, 1407 hours.
Greetings, Eduard.
Greetings to you too, Ptaah. You are here earlier than you announced, my friend.
What I had left to do took less time than I thought. But my coming here earlier only concerns 8 minutes.
It is not an accusation, my friend. But it is good that you are here already, because I have some questions that have been bothering me for some time. A moment ago, I was asked if I knew when something would be done in the Gulf of Mexico to stop the oil spill. Do you know anything about that?
We have been trying to see into the future in this regard. From this, it was clear that in the middle of the following month of July, something new is being done that is promising.
That is good, because it is really time to put an end to the contamination of the Gulf. But now I have a question about your jet ships. You told me that in the future you will shield them from view and make sure that they are not seen by the Earthlings. But as we have now discovered through observation, there are still telemeter disks whirring around, which can be seen as moving stars in the night sky. It also seems to us that you are not always shielding the ships themselves, because here and there they could be observed at night, even very brightly. Or are there others from your Federation at work who, contrary to you, do not shield their ships from view? On the 17th of April, Patrick Chanot and Christian Krakowski had a nice observation experience, about which Patrick will write an article. Actually, he should have brought it to me a long time ago to publish it in a bulletin. But if he brings it to me before I have taken it in and written it down, then I can insert it at the right place, just where it is currently being discussed.
Mentioned report received on the 12th of July, 2010, sighting report.
It was the third weekend of April, Saturday, the 17th of April 2010, when Christian Krakowski and myself were able to experience two remarkable sightings after a long period of relative calm regarding sightings of unknown flying objects. On this third weekend, which for the core group of FIGU, as every third weekend of a month, is characterized by 3 peace meditations and various sessions. Christian and I strolled on Saturday night after the last session or meeting, chatting comfortably in the direction of Schmidrudi to the front campground where we had parked our cars. The evening was calm and starry, pleasantly warm and almost windless. It was even quieter than usual, because at this time the entire Swiss airspace, as in many parts of Europe, was completely closed to all passenger and scheduled flights for several days, because the volcano Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland has been erupting regularly since the end of March 2010 and, among other things, spewed out huge amounts of ash, which spread as a huge cloud over almost all of Europe and restricted and even made all air traffic impossible. In view of this fact, and having arrived at our cars, Christian and I looked up at the calm and clear starry sky, knowing that we could enjoy this wonderful view visually without being disturbed by flashing and noisy airplanes. However, after only a few moments of our sky observation, we discovered several faintly shining light objects instead of airplanes, which were calmly and thoughtfully moving in all directions high up in the sky. But these light objects were so small, faint and shining only over short distances, that we were not sure whether they were manned or unmanned flying objects or only ordinary satellites, which have their orbits in Earth orbit and are also visible for Earth humans from time to time. While we were talking and philosophizing about these and other things, Christian suddenly drew my attention to a brightly shining object in the night sky in an easterly direction, which, seen from us, was rapidly moving from north to south over the pulpit of the center hill at an altitude of perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 meters. This object had, seen from our point of view, the size and luminosity of a middle star in the firmament. Calmly but nevertheless briskly and completely silently, it flew its course to the south. Now, when we looked at this flying object attentively, it was exactly 22:50 Hz. It turned out that it suddenly lit up brightly as an extremely bright, strong light, just as if someone would switch on a strong spotlight and direct the beam of light directly at us. The object seemed to grow to 10 times its size, while the luminosity increased almost 100-fold. This glaring state lasted only for a few seconds, after which the luminosity rapidly decreased, causing the flying object to regain its original size and brightness and, as if nothing had happened, to fly on quietly until, after a few seconds on the horizon behind trees, it disappeared from our sight. Extremely impressed by this optical demonstration, neither of us had ever seen such a bright and strong shining flying object before. We tried to find out what the phenomenal light object could be. Still discussing it, it turned out that after a few minutes a second object appeared in the night sky, like the first one in the same position and in the same size and brightness. Like the first light object, this second moving star also flew at the same speed and completely silently exactly from north to south, only to flare up brightly and strongly like the first object after a few seconds. Like the first luminous object, this impressive process took only a few seconds, after which this second object also returned to its original size and brightness and disappeared behind dark trees on the horizon after a few seconds. After this second incident, it became quiet in the starry night sky. Therefore, Christian and I, grateful for what we were allowed to see and experience, started our journey home. We both know that, with absolute certainty, these two flying objects could not have been airplanes, helicopters, balloons, gliders, etc., because firstly, we did not hear any engine or other sounds, and secondly, we also know that at that time the entire airspace over Switzerland was closed to all aircraft. Even gliders would have had to use suitable tow planes to reach this altitude, but this can be ruled out for the reasons given above, if only because of the late night time. The test flights, which were undertaken to measure the ash concentration in the atmosphere, are also out of the question for a possible explanation or identification of the two flying luminous objects, because these test flights were carried out exclusively according to so-called visual flight rules, and therefore could only be carried out in broad daylight for safety reasons. Patrick Chenot, Switzerland.
Our flying discs are not shielded from sight by us, and also not in those moments when the static energy is illuminated or dissolved. With our manned flying apparatus, it is that we usually shield them against sight when it seems necessary to us, in order not to frighten Earth humans. However, the shielding prevents us from being able to make certain recordings, which is why we only use the privacy screen when we consider it advisable for the aforementioned reasons. So it is possible that our flying apparatus can be observed both day and night, which was also possible on the 17th of April, 2010, because we had to carry out various tasks in your area that night, which did not allow us to have sight protection. So it may be possible that our flying apparatus could be observed by Christian and Patrick.
What you are saying about optical shielding and opening the optical shield for certain tasks and recordings, you have already explained that to me. But that was private, so nothing is written down about it. So it is good that it is being discussed again today. Christian Freiner raised the next question a few weeks ago, because of a forum question regarding what was said by Ketzel in the 197th Contact Conversation, Volume 5, page 129, of the 29th of October, 1984. As far as I was allowed to do so, I gave a brief answer, but it seemed to me that Christian was not satisfied with it. I copied out what is written in the contact report regarding the question. This here is it.
Certain old records have pointed out that Ptaah's father, Sfath, knew much more about your personality and mission, as well as your former personalities, and the origin of your spirit form and all things related to it. Merely why we have not received precise and deeper explanations and information from him is unknown to us.
Can you perhaps give further explanations? There was also another contact conversation about this question, and that was with you, where you said that your father Svath did not know much about my origin, whereupon you would have informed him.
Addendum of 26.6. 10. Christian Frainer and Andrea Gressel investigated Ptaah's words in relation to his earlier statement in the 236th Contact Report of the 26th of April, 1990, Volume 6, page 256, sentences 119 to 121.
But he was not exactly informed about your origin. For my part, I then informed him about what made him begin to grasp things and how his shock changed into respect and reverence. This was also the reason why he taught you many more things, and more knowledge than it would have been his job to do. That is correct, but do I not understand what the question is?
On the one hand, it was said that Svath was not fully informed about my background. But on the other hand, it was also said that he knew much more about my spirit form, my current personality, my mission, and my former personalities.
This actually seems to be a bit confusing, but it is not. It is to be explained that although my father Svath had limited knowledge regarding your former personalities, he still knew much more than we did, and we only gained more knowledge after his passing away and after Asket's mission fulfillment with you. And what was further meant by what was said refers to your earthly ancestry respectively to your pedigree, referring to the Meyer family lineage, from which you, with your present personality, originate. These things were only known to my father to a limited extent, because he did not deal with these matters in depth. The same is also true for your various former non-terrestrial personalities, because he only dealt with their history as far as it was necessary for him and his task with you. In this respect, however, he still knew a lot more than we did about your personality and mission, your former persons and the origin of your spirit form and all things related to it, so I did my own research and achieved good results, which I then taught my father Svath. So he also gained more knowledge through this, which caused him to teach you more things than it was his duty. When he left us because of his passing away, Asket took over his task, and together with her I did further research concerning your former persons, etc., and when we, my daughters Simya, Say, and Ketzel and I had to carry out our duty with regard to you and your mission, to continue my father's and Asket's task with you, we continued to make inquiries and clarifications, and thus we finally arrived at the information, knowledge, and insights that were necessary and comprehensive for us. Our and Father's knowledge about you and your spirit forms past changed for us to further knowledge only when I myself endeavored to find out all these things and communicated the obtained results to my father Svath, which made him and us all more knowledgeable. But as I said, that was not enough for me either, because many questions were still open. So after my father's passing away, I searched for the connection with the plane Arahat Athersata, and thus came to further information, which, however, only came to light in the course of the contact between us and you. So now I want to explain the whole thing as follows. My statement that my father was not exactly informed about your origin, on the one hand, therefore, referred to the fact that he only knew the most necessary concerning your persons and your former personalities, as well as also only a small part of your family tree with regard to the name Meyer. And this only back to the year 1288, when an early family tree keeper of the Meyer of Bulach in Winkel, near Bulach ZH, was a landlord official. Another family tree holder was canon at the Fraumünster in Zurich, and dean of Bremgarten as well as canon of Bulach. The name Meyer continued to stand in the old law for lord of the manor officials as well as for Schultheiss, that is to say, village leader, respectively head of the municipality. The Lord of the Manor's officials were responsible for the supervision of the management of court estates, dairy farms, and coronary courts. The office went back to the constitution of the empire, which was decreed by Charlemagne, 768-8114. But your earthly Meyer family tree goes back much further, as I found out through research. My research into the earthly family tree of the Meyer family, from which you are descended, yielded findings which led back to the Hospitaller Brotherhood, which was founded in Jerusalem in 1048 by some merchants from Amalfi, headed by a very wealthy, benevolent early family tree keeper with the then already well-known name Medjur. He was a former personality on your part, so his family tree lineage also leads directly to you. From this lineage, there were also 2 descendants who joined the Knights of Malta at a later time. From the name Medjur developed the short-lived name Medjrer, which resulted from a later emigration of the descendants in 1104 to Malta in the Mediterranean Sea. However, the name was quickly forgotten and changed again when the emigrants moved further north, where the name Medjrer was, for the sake of simplicity, quickly and without being able to naturalize, transformed into the name Mager, which existed in Central Europe, and later into Meyer, Major, Mayer, and Meyer. This is the origin of the family tree of your family, and also of you, which I have clarified up to your ancestor Major, by whom the grouping of the Hospitallers was brought into being. Through this group, and under the great commitment and direction of your distant personality ancestor and family treeholder, a hospital was founded in Jerusalem which served to care for the sick in the local population as well as for sick pilgrims. Later, armed protection was also provided for the pilgrims, as well as the border guard in Palestine. This is how the actual spiritual order of chivalry came about. In later times, the Order of Knights was moved to Malta in the Mediterranean Sea, but the early emigrants did not exist there anymore because they had moved north to Europe. In Malta, the name Maltese and Knight of Malta was born. After the Reformation, the Order of Knights split up, with the Protestants renaming the order Order of St. John and the Catholics renaming it Order of Malta. For the sake of the good cause, numerous crusaders also joined the Hospitaliters, and thus the whole of the helpfulness. The Hospitalite fraternity thus gave rise to the oldest spiritual order of Knights of the Hospitallers, and later to the orders of St. John and Malta, and the resulting 8-pointed Maltese cross became the model for many organizations. Since then, the cross has undergone several changes of use as a symbol, also as a spiritual and non-spiritual order sign, or as a symbol for humane help in hospitals, as well as accident relief services and economic things, etc. Further on, however, through the help of the level of Arahat Athersata, I also researched my and also my father, Sfath's family tree, whereby I was informed by Arahat Athersata that my father and thus also my family tree lineage led back about 31,700 years ago to a man named Oldandron, who was a personality of the Nacademian lineage and also a wise wandering teacher. This means that we are distant descendants of one of the Nacademian lineages. This fact, which my father Sfath did not know about, I submitted to him, as well as the part of your earthly family tree, which goes back to Major from Amalfi. This caused my father Sfath to teach you more things and more knowledge than it would have been his task to do. He himself never bothered to find out these things, because the information about your family tree back to 1278 and the most important things about your persons and mission were enough for him. That was enough information for him. Also concerning our family tree, he traced it back only about 7,000 years into the past, which was enough for him. This is the information I gave him and what I once talked to you about briefly when I said that afterwards he began to grasp things, was shocked, and taught you more things than were appropriate for his task.
He never told me about that, and neither have you. All I can say is that I am falling out of the clouds because I did not know about these things. Why have you never mentioned these facts to me?
I've often felt the need to, but since you never asked.
All right. Sorry, because you are used to me asking questions about what I am interested in. And since I was not interested in it before, of course, so this matter is now settled, so we can turn to other things. I still have a question about Troy, because there is still a lot of confusion. Your daughter Simyase once said that the Troy story with the beautiful Helen of Homer was a fiction. She said that Homer actually lived and wrote the Iliad, but that he told a lot of fibs because the beautiful Helen did not exist, nor did a Greek army besiege Troy, which is not supposed to have been called that either. The Trojan horse, Simyase also said, was a fib from Homer.
What my daughter told you is true. First of all, the city that Homer made, known as Troy, which is why we also call it Troy, has a completely different name, and in fact, the city was actually called Melusia. The Greek army that besieged the city and finally bloodily conquered it was in reality an army of the Hittite Empire. So it was the Hittites who truly besieged and conquered the city, staging a merciless slaughter of human beings. But the city of Melusia was not conquered by the Hittites by building a Trojan horse, which Homer had fantasized about, and which was supposed to have been pulled into their city by the inhabitants of the city. In truth, after a long siege, the Hittites entered the city through an underground system of canals and through the very large city gate, raped women, men, and children, and then mercilessly slaughtered these and many other inhabitants. The whole thing was about a brutal act of war in which no beautiful Helen played any role whatsoever, not even any Hellenic army.
Aha, so that was it, and Homer was an imaginative storyteller.
Orally transmitted stories of earlier events he mixed with fantastical embellishments that had nothing to do with reality and truth.
This will not please Homer's followers, nor the many others who take all the Homer stories at face value.
That will be the case.
Exactly. Some regretted that you no longer make predictions.
I can understand that, but I have to say that it really is absolutely senseless, because the last 60 years have clearly proven that prophecies, predictions, and warnings made publicly known to Earth humans and also to governments, etc., through you were absolutely senseless and would therefore continue to be so. All your efforts in this regard, as well as our explanations and predictions, have not borne fruit, for everything has turned out to the contrary, as you and we have prophetically, foretellingly, and warningly called the coming events. If all this had been heeded, then the greater part of all the bad consequences that were conjured up by the Earth humans through their unreasonableness, selfishness, self-importance, pleasure, and greed, etc., could have been prevented. This is especially true with regard to the climate catastrophe, the destruction of nature, fauna, and flora, the pollution of the environment and the oceans, the extermination of animal life forms, and overfishing. This among many other things, through which, among other things, enormous weather disasters of all kinds have also occurred and will occur even worse in the future.
Do you know the name of the mother of Queen Cleopatra VII of Egypt, the Great? To my knowledge, the real name of Cleopatra's mother is still a mystery.
Her name was Ptaah, and she came from a Macedonian family.
Thank you. That is all I want to know. On several occasions in the last few months, I've been asked what I have to say about the national debt of different countries. This is especially true with regard to the USA and Germany as well as various EU countries, whereby the USA and Germany's national debt is not only in the billions, but in the trillions. The questions have apparently arisen as a result of the criminal banking industry, and the threat that various states are threatened with collapse due to their horrendous debts through bankruptcy. It was asked whether I could at some point openly present something explanatory in a bulletin on this subject. I have my own opinion on this, but before I answer in a bulletin, I would like to ask you what you think of the fact that various states are becoming increasingly indebted. In my opinion, governments are not responsible in their use of taxpayers' money. Instead of drawing up a fixed budget that corresponds exactly to the state's revenue, and then strictly adhering to this budget without causing an increase in expenditure and thus not incurring debts, public finances are being used for nepotism respectively. Nepotism. Furthermore, when I look at the national debt in the European Union, I think that the greatest EU idiocy with regard to the monetary currency was to introduce a single currency in this union, the euro. The way I see it, the euro and the machinations that went with it drove the EU countries into financial misery, which would not have happened if the individual states had kept their old currencies. If anything, a single currency should have been introduced over time, if at all. A longer period of time should have been considered, whereby a period of 20 to 25 years would probably have been appropriate. However, the dictatorial nature of the EU prevented this from happening and, with the euro, created something that was very detrimental to the citizens of all EU countries from the very beginning, and will probably also continue to be so. Quite apart from the fact that the EU is a modernized form of dictatorship which, in a nasty way, ties other countries to itself and thereby somehow annexes them and, in the correct view, puts them under its thumb, for which the power-hungry EU governments are of course responsible. And that the stupid people who support the EU or join this alliance of power and dictatorship that encompasses all the countries are thus putting themselves at a disadvantage is something they do not realize because they lack the necessary intelligence.
Which is also what has actually been proven and will continue to be proven. And what you say about the EU itself, and apropos those who appear as supporters and members, there is no need for any further comment. And concerning the state debt, it would be of urgent necessity that the rulers should be forbidden by electoral regulations to incur debts, as well as the constant invention of new taxes.
This is not the way it is done, because not only do governments run up horrendous debts, but the people are also trained to run up debts in the private sector. And what has to be said about the legitimate state taxes is that not only are they levied, but also the most diverse and impossible things are additionally taxed, such as a value-added tax, even on food. Thus there is VAT on all goods, but there is also a transport tax, a stamp duty, fuel tax, and a whole range of other additional taxes, as well as hidden taxes that take money out of the citizens' pockets. And the hammer here is that the people are not refusing to do so, but are saying yes and amen to it, even though there is constant cursing about the old and new taxes and about the whole tax system. As a result of all the taxes, many citizens get into the devil's kitchen, because they have to save them on their mouths and standard of living and are driven into debt collection and bankruptcy. Many cannot pay their health insurance premiums and their interest on housing, and many others also cannot pay other important things and even taxes. In contrast to this are those who collect bonuses, respectively commissions and remunerations of many millions from banks and economic groups and do not have to pay taxes for them, whereas the poor taxpayers cannot do anything about it, because the governments and also the shareholders allow this injustice, which incomprehensibly grants these millions to managers, boards of directors and presidents, etc. But let us leave that alone, because it is no use anyway, because also in the relationship of the incredibly unjust forms of taxation of the states, the citizens do not allow themselves to be lectured and do not demand justice. No. They just put their fist in their pocket, or in their skirt. swear at themselves or scold at the pub table, without ever really asking for anything sensible to be put to a general vote, to be implemented and changed. And since nothing is done in this direction, there is also no attention paid to the fact that the rulers are not fulfilling their responsibilities in terms of financial management and the proper administration of taxpayers' money, and that they are forbidden to incur debts by the will of the people. But with regard to the accumulation of public debt, the following must be said. The way in which public finances are budgeted, even over-budgeted, managed, and spent, is fundamentally wrong. It is through financial mismanagement that debt is created, which is an absolute irresponsibility, which is due to the fact that the governments and financial managers are absolutely incapable of managing public finances. A state must never and under no circumstances budget and spend more money than can be covered by the tax revenues and their budgeting. It must not use money in any way beyond the amount of the budget, so that it is impossible to get into debt. So if any things and projects, etc. arise which, for their handling and execution, exceed the effective tax revenues, then these must be put on hold until the necessary finances can be brought together through further effective and legally appropriate revenues. Such further necessary income, however, must be of the right and in accordance with the normal taxes, and therefore may not be obtained by additional and new tax collections. But if they are, it means that taxpayers are being unlawfully exploited by government's unlawful tax collections. Basically, the tax finances must not be thrown into a uniform pot from which the most diverse things and projects and necessities, etc., are then paid. The only correct thing is, quite simply said, that for each thing, project, and for each thing a separate cash, respectively a separate account has to be kept, to which a certain amount of tax money is added, which under no circumstances may be exceeded, and therefore also not over-budgeted. Although this means a great deal of extra work for the tax authorities, because a state has to manage and administer hundreds of different funds, respectively accounts, the whole thing ensures that no debts are incurred, and that debts can be reduced. It also means, as already mentioned, that a project that needs to be financed can only be started or carried out when the necessary amount can be paid by the normal tax revenue from the relevant fund or account, respectively.
Your words will certainly be resented by the responsible persons mentioned, and even by many of the people.
This is for sure also that I will be listed again in the fiches of the Domestic Intelligence Service, which will continue to be secretly manufactured, as you told me years ago. Perhaps my words are again being suspected, in the most idiotic way, of something evil that I could harbor, even though what is said is only what is really true. Some idiots may also smell political airs and graces behind them, as I have already been accused of by a well-known mad newspaper man, although I am not politically active at all, but only express what I see. This is something that, according to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights of 10th December 1948, I cannot be accused of malicious intent, of being an enemy of the state, or of being banned. Indeed, Article 19, Freedom of Expression and Information, states, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression." This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. However, anyone who does not grant me this right, or lists me in ficken because of my opinion, is violating human rights as defined by the United Nations. And simply saying what you see, notice, and know really only has something to do with freedom of expression, but in no way has anything to do with politics, from which I keep away in every respect. With a free expression of opinion, however, political factors can still be shown and judged, etc., without politics being involved. For myself, politics is an abomination, as are religion and sectarianism, so I distance myself from them in all form. This does not mean, however, that I am not allowed to have and express my own opinion, especially not when I only record facts and do not cause any harm with them, and also do not provoke any danger, but only when I try to encourage human beings to reflect and recognize reality and truth. Politics of any form should be pursued by me by all those who are interested in it, who consider themselves capable of it, no matter whether they are really capable of it or not. And whatever state laws and decrees and decisions, etc. are, they are simply valid for me, and I will obey them, even if sometimes they do not seem to be right or are not really right, as is the case with the tax system and the mismanagement and debt-making financial administration. So I also fit into the state structure of my home country, which also applies to the Phi-Gu Association, which is also apolitical in every respect.
That is well said.
It is to be hoped that everything is understood correctly and not misinterpreted. It is not my intention to endanger any state structure or to fight and rebel against it, because my aim is only to make people think about my words and to stimulate necessary steps to achieve general state, human, personal, peaceful, liberal, harmonious, and valuable progress and success. In this way, I believe that in a purely democratic, peaceful, and state-like way, inspiration for valuable changes in governance, taxation and many other things can be generated from the people and from the rulers themselves, which, if taken into consideration, can bring about a great deal of progress. However, the whole thing must be done democratically, peacefully, and with freedom, and therefore without violence and revolution, and must therefore be approached sensibly and logically. The necessary progressive changes and improvements can only be brought about by the people's voluntary decision to vote, and never by any insurrectionary, revolutionary, or warlike violence, dishonesty, disorder, and criminal or otherwise anti-state activity.
Your words in the Earth human's ear.
Some may hear it, some may not. But now I have another question which I am to answer in a bulletin. The question refers to Petra Mariam and Anatole, who were meant to help me to spread the teachings in the manner of a wandering heraldry in the German-speaking world. Certain people do not understand the whole thing and think that the two of them were prophets, which was not the case, because they were really only meant to be active as itinerant preachers in the German-speaking world with regard to teaching and mission.
That is correct, because more was not their task. Unfortunately, they were killed in an unforeseen car accident and were not able to fulfill this task. It was also not intended that other persons should take their place, who could have taken over the task. The fatal accident of the two was therefore not included in the provision, because this coincidence was not foreseen. Therefore, it follows that the teaching in the German-speaking countries by your and the core group initiative has to be spread much more laboriously and circumstantially than the whole thing was originally intended by the activities of Anatole and Petra Mariam.
That should now actually be clear, and also that no other persons will appear who could take over the two tasks, but that everything is solely in the hands of the Phi-Gu core group, which can only fulfill its task if, through its efforts, study groups and national groups are formed in the German-speaking countries, whereby the teaching is taught widely. But this also applies to efforts to ensure that the same is done in foreign countries, and that groups are formed so that the teaching is also carried out worldwide, which is what is ultimately intended.
Through these efforts alone, success can indeed be achieved.
Without work and effort, there is no success.
If that was all, I have two more private questions for you from Quetzal and Icarina. After that, I have to go my own way again.
Naturally, ask away.